Okay, this video is the best paintings of all time, part one. It's really an introduction. So one of the purposes of this site is to show people the good stuff from the history of civilization. And in this video, I'm just going to show you these great paintings. I'll only briefly say a few comments on them. I'm not going to go into detail. It's just sort of to let you see them. I mean, that's, again, I want to show people the best of civilization with this YouTube channel. So here, of course, is The Creation of Adam by Michelangelo in 1512. And this is the greatest painting of all time, and all of civilization is dependent on this painting because it says that man was created in the image of God. This is a biblical worldview. If you have it, man is created in the image of God and therefore intrinsically entitled to natural rights. The challenging view of this in modern society is what you would call atheistic Darwinism. Atheistic Darwinism, by the way, has been accepted by the United States university system, most other countries' university systems, and by most corporations. And that means that mankind, in their opinion, is only a talking primate, therefore not entitled to anything, nothing, zero. So it's important to know that. It's not in your best interest. Okay, the next painting here is Descent from the Cross by Rogier van der Weyden, 1435. Look how incredible this painting is, and it was done in 1435. That's amazing. It's one of the greatest paintings of all time. So, the Descent of Christ from the Cross, and you can see here how Mother Mary, her position echoes that of Christ, and with their arms out to the side, they almost look like a bow, and this, of course, was funded by the Archers Guild, and that's why they look like a bow and arrow. Okay, it's as if his legs are being pulled to make the bow more taut. So the symbolism there is incredible. The emotional faces of St. John, of Mary Magdalene. It's just an extraordinary painting. If you study art and painting, this is one of the greatest paintings of all time. Okay, here's Sandro Botticelli, the favorite artist of the Medicis, the great painter of the late 1400s. And this is Primavera, meaning spring, and it's sort of part of the idea of the Renaissance, a greater appreciation of the great literature and ideas and arts and culture of the ancient Greeks, and to some extent the ancient Romans as well. And the ancient Greece from about 500 BC to about 350 BC, the time of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, is one of the most incredible phases of history in all of the world. If you only study like two phases of history in the world, what would be most fascinating? The ancient Greeks and the Italian Renaissance. Okay, so a magnificent painting. We won't get into much more detail too. He has other magnificent paintings, of course, The Birth of Venus and many other ones. Botticelli was a magnificent artist. Okay, here is The School of Athens by Raphael in 1511, and one can see here in the center, Plato pointing up to the perfect forms in the sky, Aristotle pointing down, to the earth. Let us study what is around us. He was more of a biologist, Aristotle was. And then that Raphael had basically incorporated all of these great famous scientists, artists, and writers of the time of the ancient Greeks, and to some extent a little bit of the time of the Romans. And there's Michelangelo also was honored in this. Diogenes as well on the stairs. It's an extraordinary painting, and then sort of it has a lot of more of a Roman sense of architecture, which was also magnificent. And so this is sort of, the apex of mankind, what mankind is capable of. We're capable of so much more than is widely portrayed nowadays. You go on the internet and it's just so vulgar and low class, and mankind is worth so much more. And it's another reason why, too, I'm a big proponent of the greatness of Christianity for inspiring great art, great literature. And these are things that, elevate man's sense of freedom and his aesthetic sense. They make life more meaningful, more enjoyable. And I want you to see how magnificent this is. Modern art is a piece of crap. It's a bunch of junk. Only chumps appreciate that stuff. Don't fall for it. Picasso was a phony. He stinks. Okay? I want you to see this, and there's tons more great stuff like this. And of course, that's in the Vatican. Now here's Sadak in Search of the Waters of Forgetting, and he's climbing up hill after hill, obstacle after obstacle, and that's what it's like in a man's life, or anybody's life, a woman's life too, that wants to achieve something challenging. You got to keep on climbing up. And typical in the way things go in life, you climb up 2 steps, get knocked back down 1, climb up 2, get knocked back down 1. But I find this a very inspiring painting. Okay, now here is one called Godspeed, and this is from the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, which is a bunch of painters largely inspired by the work of John Everett Millais, of the painters from before Raphael, how they felt they were more religious, more intensely inspired, more emotional. And John Ruskin had given the great speech in 1853 in support of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood of Artists, and they painted a lot of paintings from the stories of King Arthur, a lot of chivalry. And they're extraordinary. So Edmund Langton was one of the later members of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood inspired artists, but it's just great. There's all kinds of paintings like this. And then, of course, the romantic stories associated with the legends of King Arthur. Like, this is one of the most famous ones, Tristan and Isolde. And there's King Mark, and there's a whole story that goes with it all. And it's all pretty wonderful, the King Arthur stories. The GreatCourses.com has a nice summary of this. It's given by a lady, and she goes over all the legend of King Arthur if you're not familiar with it. There's, of course, plenty of books about it as well. And, of course, this is Abelard and Eloise, the teacher, student, and that whole crazy love story from around the time of the Scholastics and Thomas Aquinas. We're going to come back to Thomas Aquinas later. Okay, this is Ophelia, and this was painted by John Everett Millais, another one of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. And even though it's obviously a very sad story from Ophelia in Hamlet by Shakespeare, Shakespeare, of course, was a Catholic writer. He was relatively less known about it because he kept his life secret because it wasn't safe to be a Catholic in England at that time. But it's just a magnificent painting, the naturalism of the flowers around it. And this was a famous model who was actually laying down in the bathtub at John Everett Millais' house. She caught a cold because the heater had broken at the time of it, and he actually had to pay for her getting a little sick. But it's a magnificent painting, Ophelia. And this just shows you the typical great work done by the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood painters. Because usually I make fun of England. They're a bunch of Protestants. They suck at art. But as it turns out, once they developed the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, they were magnificent at art. Because before that, there was kind of like a joke that the Catholics are much better at painting. And of course, they're better at architecture with the cathedrals. But the Protestants had their comeback with incredible painters in the late 1800s. This is another painting from the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhoods, The Light of the World. Christ knocks, and it's up to you whether or not you answer for all the good that comes from that. So, Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood did a lot of magnificent art. Okay, here is Lifeline by Winslow Homer, 1884. And this, I think, I love it. It celebrates the heroic nature of man. And right now, in modern culture, there's all this bogus stuff to criticize toxic masculinity. What a bunch of BS. It's noble masculinity that helps promote freedom and a good society, and I like the way this painting captures that. He's saving this lady's life from a shipwreck, and you can't even see his face, sort of the anonymity of a lot of male heroism. It's fantastic. And, let me tell you something, too. Some people think, oh, women are better off. Let me tell you something. I grew up, back in the 1970s. And back in those days, women did not need to work. The routine family was married, and the woman stayed home, just raised her kids. There were big, happy families. We never had to get a ride to see a friend. There were tons of kids that lived on my block. We would play softball and kickball and kick the can, all kinds of sports. There were so many kids around, it wasn't even funny. Nowadays, children are scarce. Average family is only having like one kid. Back in those days, there were lots of families with 4, 5, 6, 7 kids, and there were tons of kids all over the place. So things have really changed. But what I'm trying to say is, despite the big families, people were a lot wealthier. The woman didn't have to work. Nowadays, in a lot of families, they cannot pay their bills if the woman does not work. And a lot of people think, oh, it's cool having a job. Isn't a woman lucky to have a job, be part of the workforce? You know what? You work because you're poor. The reason I work is because I have to. To pay my kids' college, I got to work. Okay? I wish I was rich enough I didn't have to work. I could just make YouTube videos. I could study. I could read. I could write books. I could meet with other friends interested in the things I'm doing. But no, I have to work. And most people do. And most families, the husband and the wife got to work. Usually they're divorced. So what I'm trying to say is don't kid yourself that things are better now. I think they're much better. Like a lot of women think, oh, isn't it great to be part of the workforce? Yeah, it's fun till you're about 30 because you see some friends during the daytime. After that, you want to be with your kids. And a man, too, he works because he has to make money to support his family. But, you wish you could kind of do what you want to do. But quite often, things that are fun to do, there's no money in it, so you don't get to do them that much unless you're rich. I wish somebody would subsidize me. I could do this medical pathophysiology nutrition stuff all the time rather than just as a hobby on a weekend. All right, here's George Washington at Valley Forge. Magnificent painting. And this is really where freedom in America comes from, okay? And he was the guy, he was the Cincinnatus, who once he had secured America's freedom, he didn't want to, lord over it and be tyrannical and control it and all that. He just gave it its freedom and said, okay, you're on your own. Good luck. See if you can keep your republic. Okay, so magnificent painting of him praying by his horse at Valley Forge. Awesome painting. Now here's a painting from the Course of Empire. It's a series of paintings by Thomas Cole. And Thomas Cole makes the best painting series of any painter who ever lived. And so this is consummation, meaning the height of the empire, just the magnificent affluence and opulence and architecture and everything wonderful that civilization is capable of achieving. And he's from the Hudson River School. This was done in about 1836. And unfortunately, though, there's a characteristic pattern. Vico, the philosopher historian, had written about this, how civilizations, as they reach their apex of wealth and culture, they often become decadent and immoral and lazy, and their civilizations fall apart. And so, sadly, a lot of people believe that's what's happening currently as well. But it's a magnificent painting, isn't it? And sadly, this is sort of what's happening. Now this painting here is just 1 out of 4 from The Voyage of Life, another incredible series of paintings by Thomas Cole, perhaps one of the greatest story paintings ever made in the history of the world. This one was done around 1842 and in the Middle Age phase. And I talk more about the life cycle in another video lecture where I go through these paintings in more detail. But I think the Middle Age is the best of them. So this is a typical situation a middle-aged man finds himself in. His boat is going over the rapids, the oars have fallen out of the boat, and he simply prays, the guardian angel, Mama, whoever is farther away than she was in youth, and he hopes for the best. And there's a little detour over there, but it's a little bit scary, and that's what middle age is like for a lot of people. Now here is Thomas Aquinas. He had a vision of going before Christ and said, I hope I have pleased you. I did the best I could with my life. I know I made a lot of mistakes, and I think everybody feels that way. And call me arrogant if you want, but I think it's true. I'm a little bit like Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas. Aristotle in his age summarized the known useful knowledge of his time. Aquinas tried to do the same in his age, and syncretism of what was good from the classical authors and scholars, in particular Aristotle, as well as his current age. And I'm almost in a sense trying to do that I don't think history and religion and science are necessarily totally separate. They have a lot of parts that overlap. And hopefully I can do that with this YouTube channel, is bring forward to you what has been the best things that I can find in it. I've studied all this stuff quite extensively. I didn't mean it to happen, but ever since, in high school I had a really fun life, really great social life and family. But once I got sent to Stanford and didn't know anybody, there's no cell phones in those days, no internet, I've kind of been like a monkish scholar ever since I was 18, and I've studied stuff. Like I wanted to see what was good in civilization, what was good or bad about Christianity, what has mankind achieved. And so I've really studied, and I hope to share those things with you. And here's our last painting, The Great Last Judgment from the Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo. And if you ever wanted to read a book about this, the best book to start with would be Michelangelo and the Pope's Ceiling by Ross King. And if you enjoy that, then there's a whole bunch of other books about all the symbolism in there and all the controversial ideas that are embodied in this painting. And it's rather, you'd be amazed at how much stuff is going on in this painting, but it's beautiful. So anyways, that's our introduction to art and some of the greatest paintings. Got a whole bunch of other ones for future talks. Hopefully that was entertaining for you and interesting.